Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome out to this year's 3-minute paper presentation competition. We're so excited for this audience, and I hope you're excited for our presenters. They've worked hard, and we look forward to hearing from them today. By just way of announcements, welcome. These are the preliminary sessions for the English 3-minute presentation competition. Today there will be 2 rounds. This round with a slight intermission in between, followed by our second round of presenters. All in hopes that tomorrow, those who go on from today from the preliminaries will be competing for the chance to win $600 in prizes. So good luck. We have some judges here with us tonight. There in the back, we have a wonderful Mrs. Danette Paul will be one of our judges tonight, and our second judge is Gideon Burton. We also have the wonderful chance of being judges ourselves. So like I said a moment ago, each of you should have received a green ballot. You will be helping us decide who will go on to compete tomorrow for the grand prize. So your votes do count, and we look forward to getting each of the one of these from each of you. If you have to leave after this session, you can. We will be collecting the papers in the back. If you are staying for both preliminary rounds, go ahead and keep your ballot because you'll be using that the next round as well. And also, we would like to invite you to use social media. We want to create buzz of this event and to really get it out there that you are presenting on these wonderful topics that you've worked so hard. So we encourage you to live tweet, to take pictures, post them on Instagram and Facebook, all with our hashtag BYU IngSip for English Symposium, IngSip16. If you have a program, that hashtag is on the back of the program. Before we begin with our presenters today, we're first going to be hearing from Professor Jamin Rowan and Gideon Burton, who will be talking to us about the English Plus initiative. And after their short presentations, we're going to be hearing from 2 students who will be showcasing their personal application of this English Plus initiative. So please give a round of applause for our judges, for Jamin Rowan and Gideon Burton. Thanks.
So many of you are aware that the English department this year has begun a new initiative called the English Plus Initiative. And what that means for all those students who have declared their major this academic school year and going forward will be required to take a course that either is an internship course or an equivalent to an internship experience. There's also, as this map suggests, so there's a curricular dimension to the initiative, and then there's an extracurricular dimension to the initiative, which is just the English department encouraging students to be involved in activities beyond the classroom. And in the end, the intent of this program, or this initiative, is to help students have opportunities to learn how to translate and narrate their skills that they acquire as English majors to contexts outside of the classroom. So finding opportunities to figure out what skills you have that translate to other environments, and then finding ways to narrate or make sense of or help others understand the value of the skills that you have. And so translate and narrate are the buzzwords of the English Plus initiative. We'll hear from a couple of presenters who are talking about how their experiences have helped them do that to some degree, translate and narrate their skills. And then certainly the 3-minute paper presentation competition is a great example of that. It's not typically how we present our ideas in kind of longer form papers, but when we get out in the world out there, one of the things that we need to learn how to do is to present our ideas in persuasive ways in much shorter bursts of talking. So I encourage you to find opportunities to do that, to translate and narrate your skills. Thanks.
In the spirit of that, learning how to translate and narrate the skills you learn as an English major, the English Society has been making efforts to give people opportunities to talk at length about their extracurricular and applied English experiences. And so we encourage you to go to SoundCloud and look up BYU English Society, and you'll be able to hear podcasts. They're usually 20 to 30 minutes long, where people talk about internships they've had or study abroad programs have gone on, or other interesting ways that they've applied English, like Kathy Cowley in the bottom right, who's applying English while being a mom at home and writing novels. So I encourage you to check out that particular audio podcast. And then we also, last year at the same event, we recorded students presenting 5-minute presentations about their various experiences applying English, and those are available on our YouTube channel. The 2 speakers that will follow me now will be recorded. We're being filmed right now, and we will put their materials on our YouTube channel as well. So partly I'm saying this because we invite any of you English majors to be one of our guests on our podcast, or to have an opportunity to give one of these 5-minute presentations as you're about to hear next. We are going to have 6 different English Plus presentations today, between today and tomorrow, 2 before each of our rounds. So we'll have 2 right now, 2 more at 2:30, and 2 more tomorrow at 1 o'clock before the final round. And I invite you to listen to all of them and be edified and inspired by them. I've certainly been encouraged by the interesting things that they've had to say. Just a word about the format for their presentations. Most of you are here because of the 3-minute presentations, and that you have a single PowerPoint slide and make your point in 3 minutes. The format that's going to be used by the 2 speakers that follow me is adapted from the Picha Kucha presentation format, which is a 5-minute, 20-slide presentation where the slides advance automatically every 15 seconds, and the speaker is not controlling those, so they've had to practice a lot. So it's a very exciting format, and I hope you'll be encouraging and supportive of them as they do that. So I'd like to now introduce Kurt Anderson, and he will present his, followed immediately by Justin Shaw. And when Justin is concluded, we'll start the competition proper for the 3MP. Thank you.
All right. Well, good morning or afternoon, everybody. My name is Kurt Anderson. I'm an English major, creative writing minor, and I'm talking about collaboration and drafting to make an ebook as my applied English experience. I was able to participate in a class where we decided that our final project was not going to be the same as a traditional kind of classroom. Here is a traditional classroom learning. College never changes. You've got the professor up there on his high lectern with his turban teaching. And I usually have to deal with research writing and creative writing. Research writing being any kind of different research paper, persuasive paper, creative writing being more poetry, short stories, and essays. However, in the class that I took in past semesters, there was a new challenge of writing an ebook as the goal of the class and the outcome. That was the sole goal and outcome. We had no other papers or assignments to do. Now, when I first learned about this in this class, I began to panic. I thought, how do I write this? How do I research this? This doesn't fit into my normal framework for doing classwork. And so I wondered how I was going to connect with Renaissance themes, since it was an English class about the English Renaissance, 1500 to 1600, and bring them to some kind of modern audience through an ebook. It felt like it was a mixing of old and new. Like I had to somehow talk about skyscrapers and ancient architecture, flying buttresses and Gothic arches. It felt unnatural and quite difficult. But what I came to realize is that there's a synthesis of the old with the new. That the principles of the Renaissance and of literature in those days still apply today, just as principles of architecture still apply in new buildings. So we began to work through the publishing website LeanPub, which is a free website where anybody can create their own ebook. Ours was called E-Renaissance, hosted by Gideon Burton. And I was able to start up my own little page there. And it's a very easy to use system where You simply upload a very basic text format, and you can create your own ebook. United we stand, divided we fall. We were not writing alone. We were all writing collaboratively as peers on one book. So although we each wrote different chapters, we had to adapt to each other's writing styles and formats. My topics were virtually new worlds and contemporary crafts and digital culture, exploring how virtual worlds, such as in games, are a frontier today, and how digital culture is bringing back crafts like blacksmithing. I met Tom, this blacksmith, when I was on a study abroad in England, and he was very helpful in discussing this mix of old and new. And studying history abroad helped me to learn about how Renaissance ideas such as the masquerade balls apply today. Other themes and connections were printing culture and fan fiction, humanism and wanderlust. Each of us in the class were able to engage with some Renaissance theme and bring it into present-day applicability. However, the Gordian knot was the fact that we were all different writers, and none of us had written a book together before. We wrote our first draft together, and it was horrible. The formatting was all off, all of our citations were different, and so we found out that the way to cut through this Gordian knot was iterative writing, or drafting. We made a concerted effort together to write and publish an ebook every single week. And that was what led to our success. We went through about 5 or 6 iterations of this ebook before we got it to its finished format at the end of the semester. And the greatest thing is, it was a finished book. It was not just an assignment that we had completed for the class. We had to use project management ideals with peers. We had to initiate, plan, and design in our classes, execute on our own, and then repeat that cycle before we could close with the final working product. There are new avenues for publishing and the dissemination of ideas. Ebooks are able to be created by anybody. If you just put in enough effort, you do the work, you research, and you collaborate with other people. And so I was able to find out that not only could I create this e-Renaissance book with the help of my peers and Dr. Burton, but I could create any book about any kind of research that I would like in the future, and I know that we all can, as English majors and majors in any field. Thank you.
Alrighty. My name is Justin Shaw, and I will be presenting about my internship in Washington, D.C. So about a year and a half ago, it seemed like all of my friends were talking about internships. It seemed like it was being whispered on the wind, internships. And so I decided that I needed to have this experience. And so as I was walking down the hall one day, I saw a picture of Washington, D.C., and it said, Washington Seminar, apply now. And I said, this is it. I can finally check that box. I can become an intern. I can have that internship-like experience. So I was fortunate enough to work for Senator Harry Reid. I worked on Capitol Hill. He's the Senate Minority Leader currently. He'll finish off his term this October, and it was a fantastic experience. I recommend it to everyone. When I was assigned there, I was assigned to work for the Democratic Steering and Outreach Committee. And what this committee does is they are basically in charge of fostering a dialogue with stakeholders in Washington, D.C., advocacy groups and things like that, in order to promote a dialogue and kind of drive legislation. So I was able to meet on a weekly basis with people like Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts or Chuck Schumer from New York. And these people that you hear in the news all the time, and we were able to see kind of how legislation behind the scenes is able to get formulated and then implemented. So it was a very interesting thing. Along with me, there were 4 other interns. That picture should be coming. There it is. There were 4 other interns, one was from Princeton, one was from Cornell, and the other one was from the University of Chicago. And so I was feeling extremely intimidated, as you can imagine. I mean, how am I, this lonely BYU English major, going to compete against these people that are majoring in political science? So once a week, as mentioned, we would have these meetings, and one of our leaders, her name's Claire Badger. You can see her only in the back. She's got glasses and black hair. That's the only picture I have of her. I apologize. But one day we were talking, as we were walking down the hall, we were talking about Hillary Clinton and how I think that she's kind of treated a little differently because she's a woman as a political candidate. And as we were talking about this, she said, oh, well, so you're kind of like a feminist. And I said, well, not necessarily. That's kind of a dirty word. But she said, no, you are. You understand this kind of stuff. Where did you learn all of these things? And I said, well, I took a literary theory class, and in that class we discussed a lot of the terminology. And she said, this is perfect. I need somebody who's familiar with feminism who can go to some of these hearings and take notes, somebody who's familiar with definitions like patriarchy, sexism, all of these types of things that when you're just taking notes, if you don't understand those terms, you're not going to understand what's going on. And so I need you to go, I need you to take these notes for me, and it'll be very beneficial. And so I agreed. And who'd have thought that in Washington, D.C., I'd be kind of connecting myself with something that I had only learned about and had taken place in the 70s, this feminism project, and now I was going to be taking notes and things like that. And it ended up being very interesting. One of the first things that I was able to go to the briefing on was on Islamic feminism. And this is a very interesting, nuanced type of feminism. What Islamic feminists are essentially doing is they're trying to curtail the rise of ISIS. ISIS, in many ways, as we saw in the New York Times article with the forced rape and things like that, that it is very masculine. And so what these women feminists are trying to do is they're trying to curtail their husbands, their sons, people in the community from going and joining ISIS. And I was able to go to this hearing and take notes for my boss. Another thing that I was able to participate in is the USAID. This is an initiative from the United States government where they're able to take funds and donate them to men and women in Africa, but they tend to favor women simply because these women, when they receive money to do agriculture, farming, or microfinance or things like that, they tend to give, statistically speaking, more of those resources to their children. And so this kind of had a feminist edge to it, and it was something that I was able to go and participate in. The other thing that I was able to participate in is a screening of Girl Rising. While I was here at BYU, I was fortunate enough to go and witness this documentary. It's called Girl Rising, and it talks about the importance of education for females abroad. And so as Claire and I started talking about it, she had also seen it, and we were able to contact the filmmaker who's a professor at Georgetown University, and we were able to talk about seeing if we could get that screened for the senators, and that took place in October. So who'd have thought that in these meetings, these weekly meetings with my boss, Senator Reid, and also my other boss, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, that I'd be able to make these significant contributions, even in the midst of these interns that are all majoring in political science and are very, very qualified. The reason I think this is as English majors, we deal with a lot of ambiguity. Claire Badger would frequently tell me, I love your notes are very good, and you take notes on things that are very important. And I think that comes as a result of being an English major. And the last slide was just a picture of Washington, D.C., the capital. There are things in your English major that have qualified you to participate in internships, like on Capitol Hill, that will be very beneficial to you. And those are some of the unexpected things that you can benefit from as an English major. Thank you.
Okay, so in medieval Europe, there was a circuit of entertainment, kind of like improv and stand-up comedy that we have today, where fools or court jesters would learn what people liked, what people were entertained by, and then bring it to court. And the best of the best would get the equivalent of a Saturday Night Live job, stable entertainment. Renaissance playwrights co-opted this idea as kind of a way to bridge their new ideas to the audience. It was a familiar trope to groundlings and commoners, and it gave them a lot of creative liberty. I argue that Joss Whedon is a true inheritor of Shakespeare in that he has embraced this idea of the professional fool, one that can see and talk about things that the social parameters of a play don't allow for, and has applied it to his science fiction fantasy TV shows as kind of a way of translating, inviting, and being kind of the audience stand-in for characters. Spike in Buffy the Vampire Slayer is specifically a good example. I'm going to use one episode, it's called The Lover's Walk, to talk about how Spike manages to fill these three criteria. So first of all, Spike is the translator. So there is a lot of clashing of worlds going on in Joss Whedon TV shows. You have supernatural elements, you have the real world, and then you have the little isolated world of the central characters. Since Spike is not central to any of these, at various points he belongs to different realms and breaks different tropes, has the freedom to kind of move between them and provide background context for a lot of different situations that most of our primary characters don't know. There's only so many things you can find in a library book. So that leads directly to the truth-telling, because since Spike isn't bound by any of the social parameters, he doesn't care about social consequences. So when characters, like in Lover's Walk, we have two main characters, Buffy and Angel, who are pretending to be friends, and he calls them out on it because they're not. There's no consequence for Spike. He gets to provide the insight and move on. Spike is also very much the other. He looks like a 70s punk rocker that stepped out of a Billy Idol music video. So visually he's that. He's also a vampire. And throughout the show, at every single stage, whether he's an ally, whether he's has a soul or not, he is always an outsider in some way. So he has this objective point of view that mirrors the audience's point of view and brings that as kind of an invitation, a way to bridge any misunderstandings. Seeing parallels, classical tropes like this, I feel is very important because not only do we have a chance to revisit the classics in a new way, we can give pop culture the opportunity to create a metric that will divide the art from just the entertainment. Thank you.
Okay, so I assert that Mark Twain and Charles Dickens, two realists, make their stories essentially more real or impactful for the reader by employing both realistic and unrealistic elements in their stories. This third hybrid party that they inhabit is more appealing to readers who then want to become engaged in the story, and as they do, they find that the story changes them. Briefly, the paper that this is based on that I wrote discusses that realism, or the endeavor to make art reflect reality, can be seen transatlantically. First in America, with our southern favorite Mark Twain in his short story, The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. I'm sure you've never heard of it. The Tale of Jim Smiley in his short story, The Tale of Jim Smiley, the boyish bet king of the county. He hilariously loses a bet with a stranger, claiming that his frog, Daniel Webster, can outjump any frog in the county. And second, with Charles Dickens in his Yuletide classic, A Christmas Carol. However, these two realist authors achieve the same goals as conventional realism, i.e., making the reader feel and igniting social change, but they do it by breaking from realism. So in what ways do they diverge, and how can these changes achieve the same ends? What I believe can be said for both Twain and Dickens' work is that they infuse unrealistic or fantastical elements into their realism to morph a hybrid third party that wedges itself between the two, the real and the unreal, as pictured here on the slide. The wedge widens the space between realism, which is sometimes too stark or shocking, and unrealism, which is sometimes too unbelievable. It is this space created that the mind of the reader is able to enter and engage. In A Christmas Carol, the humor, the wonder, and the kinder demonstration of social problems encourage the reader to want to be involved. In Jumping Frog, the humor, again, as well as the ambiguity infused in the story's clever structure, allow the reader to be an agent in the story. Once we are agents in the stories by invitation, by structural ambiguity, or by sheer desire, we are, as readers, taught to feel in the end, but it is because we're able to experience the thing ourselves rather than be told how we must feel. While, according to George Eliot, falsification of what is real is pernicious, Twain and Dickens both seem to understand the value in allowing the reader some choice in the matter, and that real power accompanies that choice. So what are the implications? Well, we as readers must realize that we can take part in what we read, and that we must decide when, how, and why to enter a story. We must all be deliberate readers. After all, we don't simply read a book. If done right, and often helped along by masters like Dickens and Twain, we become true partakers in the literature experience. To engage in the reading process, you not only become an agent in the narrative or story, but you have taken the reins on who it is you want to become. Thank you.
Okay, so last semester in my American literature class, we discussed a book called All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. It was published last year, and it focuses primarily on the war that happened in the mid-1900s, World War II, from a small seaside village in France called Saint-Malo. As we studied this book, we focused primarily on the issues of remembrance and truth. However, as we started to focus on these issues, I got a little confused about why this book would be titled All the Light We Cannot See, when it seemed that so often it was that the characters would not see. They chose not to see. They refused to do it. There are plenty of characters that I could focus on, but the one that I've chosen that I think would be the most effective in discussing this is Werner. He's a young German boy who, during his time in the orphanage, chooses, instead of remaining there and working in the small mining town, to join the Nazi youth program for hope that his life would be better. The problem is that when he joins this group, he believes that this is going to better his lifestyle. It's going to better everyone's lifestyle. He's fed lie after lie after lie, and even though he has several opportunities to actually receive truth and to internalize it, both from radio programs that he was illegally listening to, but listening to nonetheless, and from his sister's warnings to what he was stepping into. In addition, there are two different instances where he encounters death. One being when he witnesses a train passing by carrying Holocaust victims, people who are heading into concentration camps, and another when he witnesses the death of a young girl that he accidentally causes when he accuses her of something unjustly. While we would assume that these two experiences with death would be equally held in his mind, things that he would hold on to and remember, this is something that he chooses one over the other. He remembers the death of the young girl and it torments him, but he refuses to remember or even talk about what happens with the train the rest of the story. For this reason, I determined that this story, All the Light We Cannot See, is acting as a microcosm for our own world. As we pick and choose the things that we will believe and the things that we will and won't remember, the things that we find valuable in our world. The problem is that as we make these decisions, we unconsciously allow ourselves to be selectively blind to things that are valuable, to things that are important, and to things that we have a responsibility and an opportunity to know. Things that if we chose to know, we could ultimately have the truth on. Thank you.
One of my favorite quotes from the Book of the Courtier is, "Outward beauty is a true sign of inner goodness." I like this quote only because I know how false this can be. Someone can be beautiful on the outside and harsh and cruel on the inside. Similarly, in relating it to familiar terms, someone can be a certain way online and a completely different person in person. Members of the court or the courtiers during the Renaissance period had to gain a number of good traits to contribute to the overall image of the monarchy and for political authority. Similarly, I think that we gain a number of good traits or try to find good posts to post on our Facebook or Instagram to portray a certain image online. And sometimes, just like the courtiers, it's a front. Although some of our time online can be a good thing, most of it can also be used to portray artificial images or artificial appearances, and can also be dehumanizing each other to a single online profile. One example of this is Tinder, which most of us, I'm sure, know of. If you don't, it's a popular new app in which you're presented with a series of photos of singles in your area, and you can either swipe right to like them or swipe left to not like them. And if you like someone and they like your picture back, you can immediately start chatting with them. The problem with this, I think, is that we are dehumanizing them to that person on your phone to a single swipe. They become a swipe right or they become a swipe left, and they become a disposable good. Now, I don't want to dismiss online communication and interaction as a completely negative thing. Online communication and interaction can actually connect us in ways that we have never been able to before. For example, my friend using the same app, Tinder, is actually getting married to the man she met on Tinder next month. She has a cute profile picture on her Facebook page that says, "Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm so glad I swiped right for you." So as you can see, there are advantages and disadvantages to online communication, just as there was advantages and disadvantages for the courtiers in creating a esteemed image. They had to gain a certain image for the political authority, but they also used that image and the traits that they gained to serve other people. And I think that it's important that we use our image online and even in person to create an image that will not only serve other people, but it will we will have less artificial images online and in person. We can create a web that is connecting each other rather than dehumanizing each other, but it's definitely up to us. Thank you.
So I want you all to visualize the following sentence. The petal fell onto the ground. So when I say that, do you think of the petal of a flower, P-E-T-A-L, or the pedal on a bike, P-E-D-A-L? This was the focus of my research. I wanted to see what affected homophone perception, specifically to see if gender affected homophone perception. In linguistics, gender differences in language are called genderlex. To test this theory, I enlisted 30 participants, 15 of each gender, and I played a recording of a homophone for them. I then asked them to write the first sentence that came to their mind using whichever homophone they thought that they had perceived. For example, I would play the word sell, and they would either write something down like "I sell books" or "the prisoner in the jail cell." Unfortunately, after analyzing my data, the results were not statistically significant enough to prove that gender affects homophone perception. However, I did notice a different pattern that was very interesting. In the results, the women were much more likely to be specific in their responses as compared to the men. For example, they would specify what they ate, what was being sold, or who the prince was, often being Prince Charming. In this graph on the left here, we can see this example. So 8 women specified exactly what they were eating, while only 4 men did the same. In most cases, women were twice as likely to provide specifications in their responses as compared to the men. So why is this important? Why is this something that matters? In linguistics, there's a long-standing theory that men are socialized to use language to establish power, while women are socialized to use language to build solidarity. We can see this dynamic on the graph to the right. Women, their language use is perceived as inferior because they don't use it to establish dominance, but rather build community. Men's language use is seen as superior, therefore implying that women are inferior to men. However, this is not the case. Specificity is a linguistic feature that is a positive attribute. We can all benefit from clearer communication. And if we can find positive and impactful aspects of females' language use, while also finding the same features in men's language use, then both genders can equally use language to build relationships with others and also to contribute to society as a whole. Both genders are valued, and they can both help change the world and make it a better place in different ways. Thank you.
One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Linear time is always present in our lives. It's a constant theme in literature and art, even in a 3-minute presentation. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 artists, Christopher Nolan and Antonio Machado, and how they show the negative effects of linear time in their work and how linear time can be broken through romantic love and also parental love, and that we should ultimately use love to break linear time in our own lives. In Machado's work, the river is a constant image of something that leads towards death. If you think of a river, it flows in one direction. You can't stop it, and it always goes to the lowest point. So in the same way, our lives lead seconds, minutes, hours, months, years to death. I know, depressing. This is ultimately broken through romantic love. Machado's main frustration with linear time is that his first wife died at a very young age, and so he always felt bereft of that. And in the same way that you can scoop water up from a river and stop it from reaching the sea, you can retain loving memories of your wife or other loved ones and retain them from going into the realm of forgottenness. And so that in that way, he broke linear time. In Nolan's work in Interstellar, we see through the character of Cooper that linear time leads to desperation. We see this most readily in his experience with his children. For him, time is passing slower than it is for his kids. So he has to witness his kids growing old, even older than him. And he breaks linear time through romantic love. We see this as he reaches his hand from the future to Brand in the past, and through parental love when he's in the black hole and communicates a message 40 years in the past to his daughter, which saves her life and all of mankind. So it's my hope and belief that we should fight linear time through love. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So please use your time wisely. Thank you.
In spite of all that Katniss Everdeen accomplishes within her time of the dueling ring that is the Hunger Games, the main debate amongst teenagers for whom the book was written is, who will Katniss Everdeen pick as her boyfriend? Instead of being seen as the powerhouse of a woman that she is, she becomes a victim of the misogynistic view that a woman is only defined by the man she marries, and she's only 16 years old. Suzanne Collins, the author of The Hunger Games, did not write a character that fawns over boys. Instead, she created a character that does anything she can to provide for her family, a character that befriends a tribute of another race, a character that saves a fellow tribute from certain death. She's a woman who fights for equality for all races, and for all genders. But the online blogs and magazines that teenagers read want to know, Team PETA or Team Gale? Popcrush.com needed to know your vote about this debate because they were stressed out about it. TeenVogue.com did a slideshow with the actors of PETA and Gale and asked for your vote at the end. YALSA, The Hub, Hollywire.com, The Huffington Post, Vulture.com, Teen.com, TeenReads.com, and even Elle Magazine, a magazine that targets mostly adult women, all published something about this debate. For my research for this paper, I had to go to the third Google page to find anything that wasn't about the PETA or Gale debate. You know you're desperate when you go to the second page, and you're completely out of ideas when you go to the third. In action or fantasy novels with male protagonists, the males are not defined by which female that they decide to marry or pick. Instead, they are defined by their actions and their choices. In spite of her hero-esque abilities and accomplishments, Katniss Everdeen, because of her gender, is bound to become a Cinderella or a Sleeping Beauty. The story doesn't end until she has a man. Until women can be seen as equals to men, their actions and abilities will always be seen through the veil of inferiority. Thank you.
So when I first started to read Waverly, I thought that it was kind of boring. But the more I read it and the more I talked about it with my friends, the more I grew to love it. And what better way to show that you love something than to write a 10-page paper about it? So without further ado, Waverly is a novel by Sir Walter Scott about the Jacobite rebellion and an English soldier who gets caught up with the Jacobites. The Jacobites were a group of men and Scottish primarily, men and women who wanted to dethrone the current Hanoverian king, put the Stuarts back on the throne, starting with James, the son of King James II. And two of these Jacobites are the two main heroines of the novel, Rose Bradwardine and Flora MacIver. And these two personify reality and romance respectively through their lives and figurative deaths. Neither character actually dies. They do this many ways through their life, through things such as their names, Rose and Flora, their appearance, blonde and brunette, and the locations associated with them, Lowland Familial Home and Highland Glen, complete with a waterfall. But I'm going to really focus on their deaths. Rose's death is much more so the death of her way of life. The English come in, they rip apart her home, they throw her beloved books on the ground. The servants even think that she is dead at one point. She has had what we would today call a major reality check. Whereas Flora, after her cause has been lost, would love nothing more than to go out in a blaze of glory, yelling, "All hail King James!" But this isn't open to her. Instead, she has to settle for joining a nunnery far away in France, where she will probably never see her beloved Scotland again, a way for her to die without actually dying. And when we next see Rose, we see that she has matured and that she has learned from this experience. She has grown from a girl into a woman, whereas with Flora, she will probably remain rather static, and the only change that she's going to be making is changing into a nun. And it is through these two characters that we see that living wholly in romance, like Flora does, leads to a bright, passionate, but short life that ends at the end of your cause, whereas living in reality, like Rose, with only the occasional forays into romance, like Rose does with her literature, allows us to learn and to grow and to face life's challenges head on, just like Rose. Thank you.
So, when I was thinking about my topic for my Shakespeare paper, I was like, what topic has not been rehashed over and over again? So I'm bouncing back ideas with some friends, and one goes, well, was he a lover or a cynic? And I was like, he was a cynic. So I looked at multiple of his plays, and I found there was a pattern that he used humor and exaggerations to show the fleetingness, instability, and the superficial nature of infatuation or love. I did a close reading of A Midsummer's Night's Dream, and I specifically looked at the scene where Demetrius, Lysander are both affected by Puck's magic flower and fall in love with the first person they see when they wake up. This emphasizes the trope of love at first sight, while Shakespeare uses the entire situation and the humor to show the impossibility of love at first sight because it comes from the outside, unnatural source. Earlier on in the play, Demetrius tells Helena that there is no way that he would ever fall in love with her unless some unnatural outside force affects him. Well, a natural force affects him. Shakespeare uses a situation to show that this concept of love at first sight does not happen, cannot happen, unless some impossible means comes about. I've also looked at other plays, like As You Like It, where there's more comedic tropes that happen without the play that makes fun of love. Say, a kiss. Rosaline, in The Disguise of the Man, tells Orlando that a kiss is like an orator spitting when he has nothing else to say or needs a filler in his speech. Comparing a kiss, something that is so sacred in our traditions of love, to spitting, essentially. He uses these humor scenes that gets the audience laughing to point out that all this belief of this idealistic, boisterous, passionate love is just nothing but things that's inside our heads and is not, it's just not, it's not possible, nor is it truly idealistic because of these strange outcomes. So, was Shakespeare in love or not? And through my findings, I find that he was not. Thank you.
So one of my first experiences with Shakespeare was in my high school English class when I was studying Hamlet. And something I thought was really weird when I first read that play was just how much death there is, especially in the last act. And so years later, when I was thinking about topics for this paper, I decided to look at the way Shakespeare uses death to create meaning in his plays, and I decided to especially focus on the death of the tragic hero. And something I found as I was doing research was that this idea of reconciliation, that these characters, through their death, they actually are able to kind of get a resolution to the conflicts that they face in the play, and end with on almost a hopeful note, even though they do die at the end. And one of the best examples of this is Hamlet. Throughout the play, he struggles with the idea of death, his own death, his father's death, and also possibly murdering his uncle. And as he gets to the end of the play, he reaches a kind of acceptance, a reconciliation with these ideas that he cements with his own death. And he also achieves a kind of redemption of himself and also of his country as he leaves it open at the end of the play to better leaders. And in King Lear and Othello, it's a much different situation. King Lear, he dies over grief at his daughter's death, and Othello commits suicide after murdering his wife because of jealousy. And for them, the reconciliation is much more about achieving reconciliation with their ideal selves. For Othello, it's the good soldier that he once was before he was overtaken by jealousy. But through his death, he's able to regain his honor, regain that ideal self that he once was. And for King Lear, as he dies with grief over the death of his daughter, he shows his love for her and is also redeemed in a way through his death. And as I wrote this paper, I saw kind of why tragedy, why we like tragedy, even though it's sad, because we can all relate to having suffering in our lives, but we can see through these plays that even when there's death and all these things happening, there can still be this spark of hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's get another round of applause for everybody who presented. As a reminder, remember you are helping us to decide who will be the winner of $600 in prizes tomorrow night and continue on in this competition. Please fill out your ballots. Only check 3. I know there's so many good ones, but check your 3 favorite and turn it in the back. And in about 15 minutes, we'll be starting our second session, the second round of these 3 MPs. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second session of these 3-minute presentations. We're so grateful that you're here. The last session was absolutely fabulous, and I have no doubt this one is going to be as well. Before we begin, everybody should have gotten a green piece of paper. Does everybody have them? If you look on the back, we're starting on the presenter number 11. Your job is to help us and our 2 judges in the back decide who will go on into this competition for a chance to win $600 in prizes. So every vote counts. If you turn on the front page, here are the guidelines to where how you're going to determine your votes, but please do this. At the end of the session, you're going to be turning them back here in a box, and we will count up these ballots. For the presenters, you'll know tonight whether or not you will be continuing on in this competition. A couple things before we actually start these presentations. We have the opportunity to hear from Jamin Rowan and Gideon Burton. that will be talking about the English Plus initiative. Following them, there will be two students sharing their personal experiences and showcasing the wonderful opportunity that this English Plus initiative gives to each one of us. And so, without further ado, Jamin Rowan and Gideon Burton, give them a round of applause.
Some of you may have heard about the English Plus initiative in the English department that started in the fall. This entails two different dimensions. So there's as you can see from the map here, there's a curricular dimension, which is the top set of tracks there. All English majors that have declared the major beginning in the fall of this year, moving forward, will be required before they can graduate to have an English Plus curricular experience. That might be an internship, it might be an on-campus internship, or a new class that's been designed around a kind of a project that goes beyond the university, or is in some way internship-like. There's also the extracurricular track in which we encourage students to find opportunities beyond the classroom, to find ways, and these are the buzzwords of the English Plus initiative, translate and narrate their skills as English majors. So the whole idea behind the English Plus initiative is that English majors develop some really great skills, really important skills that make them very appealing to a lot of people beyond the university. So prospective employers, community organizations, in the home, in our church communities. We want our English majors to have opportunities to translate their skills, find out ways, discover ways in which their skills as English majors translate to contexts beyond the English classroom, and also to be able to narrate the value of those skills for people that may be in the dark about how valuable your education as English majors is. So encourage you, even if you're not formally enrolled in the kind of new major, although you can opt in if you so choose, if you didn't declare before now, encourage you to really find opportunities to translate and narrate and then learn how to narrate your skills for other people. We're going to hear in just a minute from two presenters who've done that, who've had experience that have allowed them to translate and narrate their skills. Thanks.
I just want to mention that our MC, Shalene Reiser, is the Vice President of our English Society. Appreciate her serving in that capacity today. Our president is actually Jenny Rollins. She's one of the competitors, so we thought we wouldn't make her MC. Following up on what Jamin Rowan was just saying, we have been trying to provide opportunities for students to translate and narrate their English experiences and talk about how they've been applying them. One of the ways we've done this is that we've been doing a podcast, an audio podcast, every week for some time now, and we've had current students and recent alumni who've had experiences with internships or study abroad experiences or other kind of significant extracurricular things. They come on our program and able to talk about it for 20 or 30 minutes at a time. And it's very interesting. I encourage you to go on to SoundCloud and look up BYU English Society, and you'll find a lot of very interesting content there. And I also invite you to consider being on our program. We're always looking for more people to come on and talk about their applied English or extracurricular English experiences. We also have been recording students who are giving these 5-minute presentations about their English Plus experiences. These are some screenshots from students who presented last year at our English Symposium. And we're recording today, we're filming today, and so the two students that you're going to hear from next will have their speeches recorded, and then they'll be up on our YouTube channel as well. We have a total of 6 different students who are going to be presenting on this. 2 of them presented last hour. Some of you were here. 2 of them more this hour. And then 2 more will present tomorrow. We hope some of you will join us at 1 o'clock for the final round of the 3-minute paper presentations. So without further ado, I will turn the time over to Maddie Markle and then Elizabeth Barton. They will each take 5 minutes apiece. Wait, there's a little more ado. I wanted to quickly explain to you the format for their presentations. Most of you are here to either give or listen to a 3-minute presentation, which has a single PowerPoint slide in 3 minutes. The presentation format that these next students are going to use is adapted from the Picha Kucha format, a Japanese format, where you have exactly 5 minutes 20 PowerPoint slides, and the PowerPoint slides advance automatically every 15 seconds. So it makes a very lively presentation, and it takes a lot of practice, so I'm sure you'll enjoy them. So first we'll hear from Maddie Markle and then from Elizabeth Barton.
So my name is Maddie Markle. I've got an English major with minors in creative writing and Russian, and today I'm talking about a dream is a wish you work for. No offense to Cinderella, but I think you should work for your dreams, not just let them stay in your heart. So when I came to BYU, I'd only had work experience at a movie theater. It was the best of times, the worst of times, emphasis on the worst. And I thought people would judge me because I was there so long as a minimum wage worker, and that showed I had no ambition, whereas I had a lot of dreams, a lot of ambition, and I wanted a chance to show that off to people. And so my first dream, ever since I was working there, was working a desk job. I really wanted to be a secretary. It just sounds so ideal, getting paid to like make copies and do things. And it just, I don't know why, but that's what I latched onto. And I came here, I saw other people doing it that were students. I was like, that should be me. My other dream was that ever since I was little, I really wanted to be a missionary. I saw all the boys singing, I hope they call me on a mission. And I thought it was kind of like a little boys club, and I was a little miniature feminist. I said, if they can do it, I can do it too, and I can do it better. My brother, he ended up serving when I was in junior high in the Baltic States mission speaking Russian, and so I decided that not only was I going to serve a mission, it was going to be in Russia, so I could learn Russian too. It didn't work out that way. I ended up serving in Mississippi, which was great. It was really hot, and it was a lot of work, but it was amazing. I wouldn't change it for the world. I loved my experience as a missionary. I learned a ton. But when I came home from my mission, life kind of hit me in the face. I kind of felt dead a little bit. I didn't know what I was doing, and I still wanted to be a secretary, so within a week I applied to 15 on-campus secretary jobs. The first one to contact me was the English department, which was actually like my dream within a dream job, because then I could like network with teachers and things, and it just sounded really cool. And they actually hired me, and it was amazing. I loved working for the English department, learned a lot, learned to make copies, got to like network with professors, and I loved it. At the same time, I started learning Russian on my own, well, in school. And so right now I'm in my 4th semester, and it quickly has been my favorite class every single semester I've taken it. It's been so hard. The teachers and the students in the Russian department are amazing. I've loved my experience. And so when I came here, I wanted to go to study abroad to England to do the typical English major thing, but quickly it's changed to I wanted to go to Russia again. I want to go to study abroad to Russia. But the problem was, у меня нет денег, which means I have no money. And so people always say that there's money out there, you just have to know where to find it. I didn't know where to find it, and then once I started looking at things, no one wanted to give me money. I was like, this sucks. But I decided that even though it's really annoying, that's okay. I was gonna like just take it, bring it on, and so I decided to take advantage of the experiences here in Provo. So I went to the English department internship page, and I started looking at things, still fully intending to do an internship with my dream job at the department. I don't know what I was thinking, but I quickly realized I had some gaps in my resume. I could write pages and pages on Hamlet, but I had no technical writing experience. There was a lot of good things that the English major gave me, but I hadn't really applied them yet, or I didn't realize I was applying them. I'd taken some Photoshop classes in the library, but I didn't know what I was doing with them yet. But I just kind of took a chance. I found an internship that sounded like something my friend was doing, so I emailed her about it. That lady that I emailed about the internship never emailed me back, but then my friend emailed me back, said they had a job at her place. It's really confusing. I was like, well, this sounds pretty cool. But like, I always thought networking was these people in suits. It was really scary, small talk, and it was just an awful, awful thing. But for me, networking ended up being just talking to my best friend, Sadie, talking to her about her job, and talking to her about things that she was doing and saying I was interested in the same things. She's an amazing artist. This is her and me. She did it, not me. And they loved her at her job, so she ended up getting me a interview there, and they liked me. My resume, this was my portfolio. I don't know if you can tell, it's mostly high school art projects. It was a writing sample from my English major classes. I thought it wasn't very polished, but they really, really liked Sadie, and so they hired me. And I saw potential in me as well. And so they trained me in InDesign, which is a desktop publishing system. So the first month I worked there, I watched lots of videos. I became an InDesign guru, kind of. And I learned some Photoshop, other things along the way. And they paid me to do it. I thought I had to know that coming in. And so now we can have these impromptu photo shoots, and then I get to like work them in Photoshop and put them in InDesign and then put them on social media, and it's great. And it's a lot of creative work, and I love it. I didn't know that was my dream coming into it. And my new dream is to go to Latvia on an internship, which has changed, and I've realized that there's more money for internships abroad. And so as I've chased my dreams, I've learned that they can change, they can grow, and I have the skills necessary, and I can get the skills necessary. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hope this will work. Okay. Am I good to go? My name is Elizabeth Barton, and I'm an English major, obviously, but I'm also a secondary major in French. Since I was a child, I always knew that I wanted to do English, and in high school I read a ton of classical literature, just fortified my interest in English, and I knew that was what I wanted to do. But when I got to BYU, I declared my English major, and I found out I had to take 2 years of a foreign language. So I decided to take French. I'd taken a little bit of French in high school, but I could only really say that my name was Elizabeth, that I was American. And so I decided that it was I was going to do French. And when I got into my 101 French class, I just had this feeling like this was something I had to do. I felt really motivated and empowered to do this, even though it felt really kind of impossible. Because for my whole life, I'd equated, speaking fluent French or a foreign language with being a returned missionary, and I was not that. And I wasn't going to be that. But something inside me told me I was going to do it, so I went for it. And I remember I had all these doubts. I was just kind of feeling like, I don't know if I can do this. I'll probably look like an idiot in front of people. I don't really know what I'm doing. But there was this moment where I just was like, no, Elizabeth, you need to talk. So that's what I did. I made a fool of myself, and I spoke in front of the returned missionaries. And as a result, I started really getting comfortable and confident. I couldn't, apply as much energy to French as I wanted to because I was doing English, but I made an effort to watch a lot of French YouTube videos, and eventually, after 2 years of studying French at BYU, I felt confident enough in my abilities that I decided to apply for an internship with an organization in Paris called the Petits Frères des Pauvres, which is an organization that helps elderly people. So I went to Paris this last summer for a couple months, and when I was there, I basically just answered phone calls. I made phone calls. I scheduled appointments. I organized days in the countryside. I went to hospitals. I visited people, and I had a lot of experiences I did not think I would ever have in my life. And the best part of it was that I was talking in French to these people, and I was, in essence, a functioning member of French society. There were moments that I didn't really understand what I was doing. I didn't know terminology for wheelchairs in French, but I learned very quickly how to say, it's not even a translation in English, basquier, I don't know. But I learned, and I also grew very, very comfortable in Paris, and I started just walking around by myself after work and getting to know the neighborhoods and talking to people, and I just didn't feel scared. I ate a lot of really good food. I ate a lot of macarons. I'm sure you guys know that stuff. And I walked enough that I was able to burn off those extra calories. And I also made a lot of friends. And we all spoke French. We were German, Polish, American, French, and a lot of Spaniards. My best friends were Spanish. But we didn't have a common language except French, and this really stretched my French capacities, but moreover, it just helped me to really grow to love French more than I even did before. And French really became a part of me. As much as English was a part of me, as much as my favorite English writers were a part of me, French became something that I knew I would have forever. And even now, I feel like France is, I used to just think Britain, and I still am that way. But having this dual perspective has really helped me to understand English history as well as French history and to understand the English language. So France is no longer just Napoleon to me, and I actually really like Napoleon now. So that's how things have changed. But I feel like my experiences with French have just opened up this whole new worldview for me, and I'm no longer just limited to this one single story perspective. And it's like constant mental gymnastics, honestly. I'm constantly mentally challenged. I'm like, what is this word? And I have to figure it out. And for me, it's just a way to stay constantly engaged. Plus, French literature and English literature and American literature work very well together. Their histories are inextricably connected. And so in my studies in the future, I'm looking forward to, really focusing on both languages in both countries. So I guess what it comes down to is just taking the initiative and believing in yourself and going for it. And now that I speak French, I will be able to qualify for jobs with translating or working in the foreign service, and maybe even living abroad. And I think that these kinds of skills are really indispensable for an English major. And that's what I've done.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maddie and Elizabeth, for sharing those experiences. Okay, we are now about to begin our 3-minute presentations. Before we start, I would like to encourage each of you to post what you hear and what you learn on social media, either through live tweeting, go ahead and take a picture, Instagram, Facebook, and use our hashtag, hashtag IngSip16 for English Symposium. We'd love to see what you are hearing and what you are experiencing here. We would like to also introduce and thank our beautiful judges. We have Zina Peterson and Danette Paul. Give them a round of applause. So their scores combined with our ballots will help determine who will go on tomorrow in this competition. Now, presenters, good luck. Remember, this is a strictly timed event, but you'll do great. And it's time to begin.
Many people know that Sherlock Holmes is actually based on the real-life Dr. Joseph Bell. However, most people do not know that the Sherlock Holmes stories are also adaptations of much earlier texts. From the 1840s, the Victorian penny dreadfuls, The Mysteries of London by George W.M. Reynolds. Now, these are not adaptations in the strictest or most traditional sense. There are not recurring characters or narratives between the two. But what is shared is an adaptation of the use of newspapers, what I'm calling the chronotope, which is a term from Bakhtin, which just means an object that embodies complex and interconnected ideas that are then able to be conveyed through time and space. You can just kind of substitute the word symbol anytime I say chronotope, and that'll probably be good enough. So this is best displayed in the Holmes story, A Sign of Four, which is the second story Conan Doyle wrote, and features the multiple features and consequences of the chronotope. It opens with Watson and Holmes discussing the earlier adventure that they had, A Study in Scarlet, which Watson has written up and then published as a brochure in newsprint, some form of newspaper. And in this discussion, so it highlights the fact that there's some physical element of the chronotope, as well as obvious links to crime and criminality in the nature of the case that Holmes and Watson work together to solve. What's less apparent is the link to lowbrow and popular culture, which is another feature of the chronotope, but shows in how Holmes responds to Watson, claiming that Watson has sensationalized and romanticized the adventure that they had, turning it into something that would appeal to the lowest, basest form of culture, to the lowest elements of society. This moment also highlights one of the consequences of the chronotope, the metatextuality, where Watson and Holmes in the narrative are talking about a story that you and I can read in our own reality. So they're talking about something that exists in this fictional world that also exists outside of it. It'd be like if you were watching a TV show and on the TV show they're watching that same TV show. And so this is important, recognizing this adaptation that's taking place, because it highlights that the narrative of detective fiction also includes this lowbrow pulp fiction element. Thank you.
Okay, so the handsome devil in the middle of this photograph is John Y. Nelson, and he lived on the frontier during the American West, and here he is with his wife and family. Now, you may not know who this guy is, but I promise you he has affected you because he was a frontier storyteller, and I'll explain it. So he moved out west when he was a teenager, and he just decided to be part of an Indian tribe, so he literally sat in a teepee and didn't move until they let him stay. So that was the start of his frontier life, and he actually did a lot of really cool things. He interpreted and scouted for the U.S. Army. He helped the settlers. He guided the Mormons to Utah. He was also a member of Buffalo Bill's Wild West exhibition. So he's a really interesting guy, but again, why is he important? Well, let me explain. So I first ran into John Y. Nelson when I found his autobiography called 50 Years on the Trail. And I realized that there was some value here, so I studied it. I read it lots of times. I made footnotes for it, appendix materials. I wrote a critical introduction for it. And after all of this research, I realized something. This book was basically a bunch of baloney, and he probably made most of it up. So I found this out while looking into his claim that he led the Mormons to Utah. So he says in his book that Brigham Young personally came to him saying that they felt they would never reach their destination unless he was with them guiding them through the desert. Juicy stuff, I know. Then I found a blurb in the Millennial Star, which was an LDS contemporary newspaper, about Nelson's book, and the Mormons did not like it. They said that his story was utterly without foundation in fact, and that the Mormons were guided to the Salt Lake Valley by no one but the God of heaven. So, what did I do with all of this? I looked at Nelson's book and I realized that it may be a bunch of baloney, but I think it's baloney worth celebrating. Because John Y. Nelson was a storyteller on the frontier, and the best frontiersmen were storytellers. It was an oral tradition. So he was taking part in a larger story, and that story was the frontier myth. And that frontier myth is what we base our American identity on. So, wait, we base our identity on lies. Well, sort of. I'd like to think of it as making poetical mountains out of historical molehills. So what Nelson really did was he painted this American West that we as Americans just love and we cling to. So what I'm really saying is that the storytellers of the frontier, whether factual or not, their stories, actually molded our country's identity, and I think for the better. So I'd like to thank John Nelson for telling his stories, whether they were true or not. Thank you.
Bologna worth celebrating. I'm going to keep that one. That's good. I like that. So when I first started writing my paper for my capstone, my 495 class, I wanted to talk about Jane Austen because I love Jane Austen. I'm a self-admitted Jane Austen fangirl. I'm not ashamed. I'm very proud. And so the question that I came to originally was, what is it about Jane Austen? Why are we still adapting her? Why are we still making Pride and Prejudice movies? Like, what is it about them? And I quickly came to realize that this was not a very good question. This was way too broad of a research question. There are way too many answers to it. And so instead, I came up with a better question, which was, okay, what are these new adaptations bringing to the table? And more importantly, why should I care? And so for my project, I looked at probably the most recent Pride and Prejudice adaptation, the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. It's a YouTube series. It's very funny if you haven't watched it. It's a good laugh. But the most interesting thing that the Lizzie Bennet Diaries brought to the table is its new multimedia adaptation. And that's actually not a new idea. It's been going on for years and years. But it's implementing it in a new way. As you can see behind me, these are a few examples of the multimedia nature of this adaptation. Instead of just having the YouTube videos, there was also Facebook pages. The characters had Facebook pages. The characters had Twitter accounts. And interestingly enough, in a number of different episodes, the characters would, wrap up what they were doing and they'd say, oh, let's go to Bingley's party. We're going to go out and party. And then if you happen to follow them on Twitter, you could see what they were doing. They would live tweet what was going on at the party. Lydia would say, let's go do sock slides in Bingley's awesome hallway. And then Jane would say, I can't find Bing anywhere. You know, these kind of live tweets of what's going on. And the reason that that matters is that this kind of adaptation is driving towards a new, more immersive, more personal kind of entertainment. Instead of just watching something happen and having it be closed to you, you get to actively participate in this kind of adaptation. And so this harkens back to, dozens and dozens of, hundreds of years ago. Shakespeare had these kind of audience participation things going on in his works. He encouraged people to boo and shout and cheer whenever they felt like it. And this is that same kind of thing. And so if you have the opportunity to participate in a multimedia adaptation like this, I would encourage you to go for it. Thank you.
In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution legally abolished slavery. But 75 years later, Richard Wright still described blacks as white property in his novel Native Son. Now, I read this book in 2015, and I was seeing images like the ones on this screen all over the media. And I realized that Chicago in the 1940s is not all that different from America today. And I asked myself, when one race experiences a disproportionate amount of violence, who is responsible? Native Son forces us to confront this question in uncomfortable ways. In the novel, a black man, Bigger Thomas, is responsible for murdering a white woman in a very gruesome manner. But we soon realize that Bigger is actually just a part of a larger cycle of black violence that begins with white objectification of blacks. In this setting, the only freedom afforded blacks comes from buying into that restriction. Blacks soon begin to view themselves and are viewed by whites as less than human. As you can imagine, this objectification is very painful and dehumanizing. And so to deal with that pain, blacks blind themselves to the full comprehension of this inequality. And Bigger sees that blindness in his family members and friends, and he's ashamed. So to rid himself of that shame and that blindness, he turns to the only outlet afforded him in this society, and that is violence. Now, when violence gives someone meaning and identity who has only experienced shame and objectification, we have to ask ourselves if our traditional definition of violence is sufficient, and also ask ourselves who's responsible for perpetuating that violence. In Native Son, ultimately, whites make excuses for their mob violence and for sentencing Bigger to the death penalty. And so I learned that in the setting of Native Son, and to some extent in our society today, black violence is not afforded the same protection that white violence is given. So I asked myself, as a white woman living in this society of black violence, what role I might play in the cycle that I had never previously considered. And I realized that the way that I interact with diversity, not only of race, but also of religion, of gender, and even of opinion, matters. It makes a difference. And that's why the message of Native Son is still relevant, because it forces us to consider our culpability in the cycle of black violence that persists today. Thank you.
I converted my essay into a slam poem. Okay. Sense, from the Latin sensus, which means the faculty of feeling, thinking, and meaning. We are told that we have 5 senses, but recently I read 45 essays and I began to notice the word sense was linked with other parts of the human experience. Sense of freedom, sense of time, sense of adventure, sense of dark autumn nights, sense of a new day dawning, sense of order, sense of coming thunder, sense of humor. Maybe we can better understand the word sense by looking at its function as a root word. If I were to set up 2 identical movie theaters today,
one showing a Nicholas Sparks movie and one Michael Bay, the Sparks would have a giggly romance until they die of cancer, change their mind, or move away. There would be soft music and lots of used tissues at the end. It would be sentimental. The Bay movie would have monsters, robots, aliens, with lots and lots of explosions and beautiful women. There would be loud music and a slight deafness at the end. It would be sensational. If we hooked both audiences up to machines, we would see the physiological responses of overactive senses in both of them. Yet sentimental is seen as negative and sappy, while sensational is seen as vivid and exciting. Maybe sense is physical and sentiment is emotional, but if we limit sense to just what we feel physically and sentiment to what we feel emotionally, then what about physical pain? It can't be deemed a sentimentality because it's not something you can see, smell, hear, taste, or touch in actuality. Physical pain and emotional pain both light up the same parts of the brain, so why do we treat emotions with disdain and tell people to put their chins up and change? We gain some sense through our senses. I know that lion cub fur catches on the ridges of your fingers. I know that New York sounds like sirens and swearing. I know that pizza is the best thing I've ever tasted. But once, when I was 8, I licked an ice cube tray, my tongue got stuck, and I still have a scar from when I pulled away. And some may say that it was against common sense. Is common sense something that each person is inherently born with? Do we add to it every time we do something dumb so the next person knows not to do it? Does it vary across cultures, ethnicities, genders, and ages? Is it a book passed around and you have to memorize every page or else risk showing the world that wisdom isn't necessarily contagious? Because I think we should be allowed to make our own mistakes without hearing the sage, well, isn't it common sense? Sensibility is used to describe rationality, but my physical senses preach against it. When I see a rainstorm, I toss on a swimsuit and rain boots and plow through puddles as quickly as I can. I am feeling raindrops against my skin. I am feeling joy as I search for the biggest puddles. I am not thinking about pneumonia or towels or tracking mud through my mother's house. It's strange to me how the simple 5-letter word sense has come to mean so many things. Sensitive, sensational, sentimental, sensible, nonsense, common sense, sensorial, sensual, sensuous, sensitized, senseless, sense.
So in high school, I was fascinated by Victorian ideas on female mental health. Things like hysteria being caused by wandering uteruses, or the cure to depression being found by lying in bed for weeks at a time amused me. In my 251 class, when I learned about psychoanalytical approaches to literature, I knew I had to read my favorite Victorian short story in this manner. The Yellow Wallpaper is not only a critique on women's mental health care, however, it is also a cautionary tale of what happens when individuals are removed from the symbolic order. The symbolic order is one of 3 developmental phases. The first is the real order. In the real order, infants are one with anything that gives them pleasure. This is most often their mother. The next stage is the imaginary order. In the imaginary order, individuals realize that they are a separate entity and they are becoming their own being. The final order is the symbolic order. That's where we as adults are right now. We learn through language that there are rules and regulations and that everything has its place. This is enforced through the law of the father, making the symbolic order patriarchal in nature. Charlotte Perkins Gilman illustrates what happens when individuals are forcefully removed through her use of setting and the 2 houses. The first house is the narrator and her husband John's current townhome. The family is away in the country house while they wait for repairs on the townhouse to be completed, as well as repairs on the narrator's mind. Both of these changes are brought about by John, acting in his role as the enforcer of the law of the father, to bring both his wife and the house in line with the symbolic order. We can see that this house is representative of the symbolic order, as everything has a place and a purpose. The color is there for a reason. The windows are in a specific order. It's purposeful and practical. However, John chooses a house to reside in that resembles his wife's psyche immensely well. The house is 3 miles from town, strange, broken, queer, and not really in line with Victorian ideas of beauty. Likewise, the narrator is strange, queer, she's mentally ill, she doesn't fit in. First, because she's a woman and a bit defiant in a patriarchal society, but also because she's mentally ill. Adding fuel to the fire, John separates her from society by putting her in the top of the house, away from society, used as an asylum and we can see this through the gouges on the floor and bite marks on the bed. Likewise, he separates his wife from society by forbidding her from visiting people or even moving down to the bottom of the house after her complaints. Through Charlotte Perkins Gilman's use of setting in the two houses and in the room, she illustrates that when individuals are forcefully removed from the symbolic order, they retreat into the safe and loving arms of the maternal order, where they have of the maternal real order. Thanks.
Before getting on to the bippity-boppity work, Cinderella's 1950 Disney godmother comes out and seems to have misplaced her wand. She looks under the bench, she shakes out her dress. I forgot, I put it away. Pulls it out of the air. Okay, so a few moments later, she's about to send Cinderella off to the ball, just still dressed in her rags, smiling benignly and nodding her head before realizing, oh goodness gracious, child, you can't go to the ball dressed like that. So our round friend is a little absent-minded at times, but she leaves us with an important image that carries on for other godmothers, that she is chubby and cheery. Let's fast forward on to 2015. Helena Bonham Carter has lost the rounded figure, though not the rounded dress. But she takes her pumpkin into the greenhouse, turns it into the coach there, and almost risks getting squashed by that pumpkin's enlargement. Why on earth did she do that? So Disney got rid of the rounded figure, but what did they have left? The ditziness. Okay, so sometimes our fairy godmothers are chubby and cheery, but they're also ditzy. So I wondered if this was just a Disney thing. So I looked at a few other fairy tale tropes on TV. And what did I find? From 1950 to 2016, from animation to live action, from Disney to non-Disney, we have these fat fairies. Sad, isn't it? Okay, so there are a few fit fairies. We have some in the Rodgers and Hammerstein versions. We have some in the Slipper and the Rose. But they all fit into the same ideal body type, the ones that the princess have. So I termed them fit fairies. And do you want to know something? They get more screen time than the fat fairies do. Well, that's kind of a problem, especially in our fat-hating culture, because it perpetuates the fat taboo. Marilyn Wan, the leading top researcher for the fat studies, says that even skinny people or normal-sized people constantly live in this fear of getting fat. Why? Well, it's perpetuated by things like our friends on TV, our little fat fairies. We have a large variety of media, so we should have a large variety of stereotypes with their adjoining personalities. But fairy godmothers on TV show that we don't have this variety. Thank you.
So introducing Slaughterhouse-Five to my class, my professor described it as, it's this weird mixture genre of science fiction because it has aliens, and then it's kind of a memoir because it deals with Vonnegut's experience as a POW in this bombing of Dresden. Then he continued saying, now you probably never heard of this bombing of Dresden, but it's this horrible Allied attack on Dresden, Germany that killed thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in this little refugee town. And I had just been on a study abroad to Germany, so I was very concerned. I was amazed. I had never heard of this. I needed to learn more. So I started to research. And also in the first couple chapters of the book, Vonnegut is expressing his need for more information. So I felt connected with him. I needed to learn more. So I started to research. And then there were articles printed right after the event in 1943. And they were very biased and they were very extreme in their presentation of this bombing. And so not a lot of information can be discerned from two extremes. And then also in the 60s, there was whole books written about Dresden, and they were very inaccurate and very wrong. The most famous being David Irving's book, The Destruction of Dresden, where he famously just added a couple zeros to that end of that victim count, making it larger than it actually was. So for me, I was horrified. How was I supposed to learn about Dresden? How was I supposed to learn about this event if I didn't have any accurate information about it? And I felt that this was also Vonnegut's problem with this book. And so for him, he decided to find truth through story. Slaughterhouse-Five is his truth about Dresden. It is his way of coming to terms with this horrible act. This shows in the book where Billy Pilgrim, Vonnegut's double, is talking with this character of Rumford. And Rumford is basically quoting and is being in this discourse of all these people, and he is actually quoting the David Irving book and is citing these inaccurate information. And to this, Billy Pilgrim just says, I want you to know I was there. I want you to know that I was in Dresden. And he says, we don't ever have to talk about it, but I want you to know I was there. And for me, this was Vonnegut's way of setting aside historical fact, saying, listen to me, listen to my story. You can learn truth. You can learn things from stories. And as English majors, I feel like we already know this, but Vonnegut is showing dignity is important, empathy is important. You need to learn these things, and you can learn that in story more than you can learn it in historical fact. Thank you.
Virginia Woolf's 1927 novel, To the Lighthouse, tells the story of the Ramsay family and of Lily Briscoe and their trip to the Isle of Skye in Scotland. Now, the key image in this novel is that of the lighthouse, which probably doesn't surprise you considering the title of the novel. Now, most scholars, including Jack Stewart, argue that the lighthouse is a symbol of unity, a symbol of light, and in some cases, a symbol of Mrs. Ramsay herself. Yet, Virginia Woolf never actually intended the lighthouse to be a symbol of anything, saying the following. Now, Virginia Woolf's statement made me wonder why so many scholars continue to insist that the lighthouse is a symbol of unity when Woolf clearly did not intend for it to be. And this question led me to the realization that the lighthouse has both unity and disunity, and that's the point. By embracing the paradox of separation and connection, it's able to hold the novel together, just like the second section of the book is able to both divide and connect the first and third sections of the book. Consequently, I argue that the lighthouse is not a clear-cut symbol of unity like most scholars argue, and that we have to realize that we have to see division in order to find unity. Now, at the very beginning of the novel, James is very upset because his father, Mr. Ramsay, will not allow him to go to the lighthouse. And Mrs. Ramsay perpetuates this argument by lying to her son and telling him that they will go to the lighthouse. Now, obviously, a lot of the emotional drama in this scene is caused by Mrs. Ramsay, but the entire time, the lighthouse is the image that pervades the work. It casts a shadow over James's hope of going to the lighthouse and causes tension in their family relationships. It's not until the very end of the novel that James and his father are able to go to the lighthouse and finally find unity. The same is true for Lily Briscoe. She has been conflicted the entire time with her ideal self, this idea of a modern woman who doesn't need to be married, yet she still admires Mrs. Ramsay, the Victorian mother. And it's not until she finally realizes that there's a division between these two ideas and that she is able to realize that she wants to be the modern woman, that she can draw the line on the canvas, the metaphorical lighthouse, and finally find some connection in herself. So although the lighthouse does bring several moments of unity in the text, it also brings many moments of disunity. And I think that was Virginia Woolf's point. She realized that in order to find any sort of connection, we have to recognize the division. Thank you.
Raymond Carver's short story Cathedral was written in 1981, and it details this unique interaction between a pessimistic narrator and this blind friend of his wife's. The critical debate surrounding this story has often been concerned with, is this encounter with this blind man ultimately a scene of redemption for the narrator, or does it perpetuate the negative worldview held by the narrator? We hear the title cathedral and we can't escape the religious connotations. So when we begin reading the story, we're surprised to find that not only is it not a religious story, it is in fact a post-religious story. And it has characters struggling to find meaning in a post-secular society. So it's not religious. It's not even about the loss of religion. It's about a society dealing with its religious legacy after religion has already been lost. And our narrator becomes the unlikely champion in this quest for meaning, even though he's been entrenched in this nihilistic lifestyle. And the catalyst for him coming upon this discovery is when he's sitting with this blind man and they're watching this program about cathedrals. And the blind man asks him to describe the cathedral to him. So he attempts this, but he fails. And he says, I can't do this. Religion's never been a part of my life. It's just not important to me. So he tells this to the blind man, and the blind man says, okay, let's draw the cathedral together. So they get out a piece of paper and they begin to draw it together, and the blind man tells him to close his eyes, and they will both sort of blindly discover this cathedral together. And while they're engaged in this enterprise, the blind man insists that the narrator include people in his depiction of the cathedral. And at this moment, he says, this telling statement, what is a cathedral without people? And this is the moment that I argue unhinges the narrative. And it becomes less about the narrator and more about a social and philosophic issue, about trying to find this meaning in this post-secular society. And the blind man is no longer just a blind man. He becomes a blind prophet archetype, and he serves to bring this idea of belief back into the life of the narrator. And the narrator at the end of the story becomes torn between his nihilistic lifestyle and wanting to believe in something. And this idea of something is repeated throughout the end of the narrative. So in the end, it's not so much about, is the narrator redeemed? It's about setting up this discourse between nihilism and belief. Thank you.
Dad nothing, out cold. A big bump and a strange sense of nostalgia. Crumpled in a broken, delirious heap before the gates of the farmhouse. Time passed in uneven flashes as I drifted in and out of consciousness. So why are characters in young adult novels always passing out? This was the question I decided to research for my paper. And in order to try to come up with some sort of an answer or conclusion, I went to the YALSA 2015 Top 10 Young Adult Fiction book list and discovered that 7 of those books feature at least one character that passes out. And the quotes I read earlier are from 4 of those novels. So in looking at this, I realized that there are 3 key ways that authors really use unconsciousness in the plot and in characterization. The first one is just a way to move the plot along. This is seen in Owen, Dragonslayer of Trondheim, where at the end, it's much easier to just have the narrator be knocked out and then wake up in a hospital instead of the author going through all of the tedious details of the helicopter coming, saving everyone, and taking them to the hospital. So in that sense, it's a really clean way to jump from one point in the plot to another. The next way I saw unconsciousness being used was as a rebirth or a call to action. An example of this was seen in Van Gogh, where Van Gogh goes to a mysterious island and discovers all these monks living there. And once he is discovered, they drug him and he wakes up back at home. And after he wakes up, he's confused and his curiosity is piqued. And so he travels back to the island and figures out some secrets of his life that sent him on a wild, crazy adventure set in World War II. So in this instance, the unconsciousness is a barrier between his old life and his new life that allow him to go through a rebirth to take new action, reassess his values and his perspectives. The last way is that it is a unique exploration of characters. This is seen in Noggin, a kind of strange book where Travis Coates suffers from cancer, and his parents take drastic measures to remove his head and have it placed on someone else's body 5 years in the future. In this Rip Van Winkle style, Travis wakes up and everything around is different except for him. As you can imagine, this allows the author to explore adolescence in a way that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So each of these books uses unconsciousness, being knocked out, or passing out in a different situation in order to shape the plot. And even though there may not be one clear answer as to why unconsciousness is found so frequently in young adult fiction, it is obvious that it serves a plethora of purposes depending on the content and context of the novel. Thank you.
Anybody who has babysat children for longer than 15 minutes knows that adulthood is a destination these tiny humans can't get to fast enough. Adulthood is where you learn to not physically attack someone because they burned your bagel bites. So, to the delight of babysitters and scholars everywhere, my paper took Lord of the Flies through the lens of Sigmund Freud and sought to prove that it is in fact unsuppressed childish tendencies that bring about destruction in society, not necessarily a loss of innocence brought about by adulthood. So my research is based on the idea of the anti-human, which was established by Immanuel Kant in the late 18th century. He said that true enlightenment was man's emergence from his own self-incurred immaturity, which basically means that humans aren't as great as they think they are. Then came Sigmund Freud, and he took it a step further. Humans were driven by instincts or by urges. They were made out to be something more like an animal than a human. And although dropping Freud's name today probably won't win you a lot of points, using his work in conjunction with Golding's actually makes a lot of sense. Freud's work was still very, very important in the realm of the human psyche when Golding was publishing, making their work compatible if not necessarily contemporary. So, where do we find Sigmund in Lord of the Flies? Well, the first instance of Freudian psychology is found in the way the boys revel in being dirty, which is one of the first phases of sexual development, according to Freud. In one instance, Ralph tells the boys where the lavatory should be, but they ignore him. They laugh at his insistence, even though they're old enough to know the consequences of their literal dirty habits. In another scene, the boys cover themselves in the blood of the sow after they've killed her, but it's more for sport than for sustenance. Another instance of Freudian psychology is in the lack of what he calls sublimation, things like art or music that adults usually produce once they realize that society can't function on instinct alone. Now, the boys attempt something like this. They cover themselves in war paint, but they do it for selfish reasons. They do it to cover themselves as they hunt first animals and then each other. And this, combined with their inability, or I guess lack of desire, to keep clean, makes it so they can't run a functional society. Now, this idea of a functional society, at least to Freud, is based on the idea of the adult, or the suppression of childish urges. Now, this is emulated in the character of Piggy. When he is about to be murdered, he tells the other boys, what are the grown-ups going to think? Which makes it seem that adulthood is the standard which society should be judged by. However, childhood wins out over adulthood in this instance, and he's pushed off the cliff to his death. So those are the three main points: the focus on cleanliness, on sublimation, and the adult-imposed order that make up my research. But what do we do with the anti-human when it comes to the humanities? Isn't that kind of like in direct opposition to what we decided we wanted to study? Not exactly. See, if we really want to understand the human experience, we have to start at the very beginning. We have to start at childhood, not just studying the products of adults. In this sense, we're able to get a better understanding of what it means to be a human, to understand why children are so obsessed with bagel bites, or maybe, I guess, more realistically, what it really means to be a human, what really is inside the darkness of man's heart. Thank you.
So that concludes this round of the 3-minute presentations. Can we get another round of applause for all of our presenters? Truly fabulous. Okay, now take a couple moments, mark up your ballots. Remember, only 3 check marks for this entire session, which is really hard because they were all so good. As soon as you mark those up, go ahead, we'll collect them in a box back here. Presenters, you should hear by this evening who will go on to present in our final competition, which happens tomorrow here at 1 o'clock. Hope to see you all there.